Well, recently I was talking to a former teaching assistant of Bill's, and she made the comment, well, do you know so-and-so? She's a Kennedy Center person. And it got me thinking, well, what is a Kennedy Center person? When I think about what that might entail, it's certainly someone who is curious about the world, who looks at things from a interdisciplinary and an international perspective, and has a sense of global awareness. Certainly someone who's widely read and informed in politics and history, economics, culture, and developed global competency. Someone who understands and is interested in and learns languages. And then, as we say in our Kennedy Center mission statement, someone who is equipped with the perspectives and tools to promote intellectual, physical, and spiritual well-being throughout the world. Those qualities describe, I think, a Kennedy Center person, and they also very aptly describe Bill Perry, who is our 2018 Alumni Achievement recipient. I could do a really personal introduction, which I won't do, but I have had the opportunity to spend time with Bill throughout my career at the Kennedy Center, traveling across Europe and Asia and the United States. I've seen him in action negotiating at the UN, as well as some very heated battles with city council. I've also had very many happy debates with him on international politics and a wide range of issues. As you may have seen from his bio, Bill is a graduate with a BA in International Relations from the Kennedy Center and a JD cum laude from BYU School of Law. He was a corporate attorney early in his career with Dechert in Philadelphia, and then returned back to Utah, where he leads Perry Homes, a local real estate development company. He serves on the Utah Land Use and Eminent Domain Advisory Board, the Commission on Civics and Character Education, and as a real estate commissioner, all three appointed by the Governor of Utah. He is the VP of the Utah Property Rights Coalition, and for many years, almost too many to count, he's served as an adjunct teaching professor for our Kennedy Center Model United Nations program. I have to mention that he has been involved with the program for the 13 years where the program has received the 2 top outstanding awards. And just last year, the team received a record high of 12 position paper awards. I mention that because Bill helps with the writing portion of the class and uses his legal writing and IR skills to pass that on. He has been a great support to the Kennedy Center in the creation of our International Advisory Board, and he is also the father of 4 children along with Kacey Perry. Please join me in welcoming our 2018 Alumni Achievement Award, Bill Perry.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Corey for his kind words and for that very generous introduction. It's a sincere pleasure for me to be here today with all of you. The Kennedy Center has played a very important and formative role in my life. As Corey mentioned some of these things in the introduction here, it occurs to me that while I graduated from BYU in 1997 from the Kennedy Center and then went on to the law school, I've really never left BYU. I mean, I had a couple of years where I took a hiatus and I went and practiced law with a firm on the East Coast, but other than that, I have kept my association with BYU very strong and have continued to participate here. And it's been a major benefit to my life. And so I'm very honored at the recognition today from the Kennedy Center. You have no idea how much I have benefited by the relationship that I've had here over the last 20 some odd years. As I think of what the Kennedy Center has provided me, it's provided me a real opportunity to understand and think critically about the world. I learned so much during my undergraduate education here, especially through the various experiential learning opportunities that the Kennedy Center provided. Now, granted, some of those required me to work and to spend some money to experience them, whether they were study abroads or otherwise, but the things that I learned at the Kennedy Center from the time that I spent here have really formed me as a person and have guided me in my career. So as Corey mentioned, following my graduation from undergraduate school here with an international relations degree, I went on to get a law degree at the law school, and then went back to the East Coast, where I practiced corporate law, focused on mergers and acquisitions at a large law firm in Philadelphia and New York. And I realized right off the bat that my Kennedy Center undergraduate degree had taught me so many things about the functioning of the real world that when I got into the law firm and I started hearing about, multinational corporations and multinational transactions and M&A transactions across borders, et cetera, I knew a lot of that stuff. At least theoretically, I understood what they were talking about, whereas many of my counterparts were at somewhat of a disadvantage. And so I think the Kennedy Center equipped me very well to go out into the world and to embark on this career that I kind of stepped into. So after a couple of years practicing law, my family here in Utah, my dad started a real estate development company back in the 1970s, and the real estate development company had grown to be something of fairly sizable significance, and I was the oldest child, and he was constantly in my ear while I was in Philadelphia, talking to me about the various opportunities that we had here. And so I made the decision, after I had some training with the law firm, to come back and embark on a career here in the family business. Now, many at the time, thought I was crazy. I had a law degree. I was working for a very prestigious law firm. I had this international relations background, and they thought, you're going to go back to Utah and watch people build buildings? And, it didn't necessarily seem all that exciting to them, but to me, it made a lot of sense. And there were lots of opportunities that came from that, and I've been remarkably impressed by how many different ways I've had the opportunity to use my Kennedy Center degree in the field that I'm currently involved in, and that's real estate development. The world is a small place, and we no longer operate in a vacuum. It's not like the decisions that we make here in real estate development every day are not impacted by things that are going on all over the world, because truly they really are. And I want to talk just a little bit about some of those things today and some of the impacts that we're seeing in our business that tie directly to things going on in the greater international economic system. So in 2015, 2016, while our current president was running for office, he made the comment over and over again that the United States has been ripped off. And he generally made that comment in the context of international trade. And this was something that I think probably allowed President Trump to carry the Rust Belt states for the Republican Party for the first time in really a generation. This focus on international trade was something that resonated heavily with the citizens of those upper Midwestern states. And the president made a very profound promise to all Americans when he ran for office, and that was that he would make America great again by bringing back the industrial base to our country that we have lost over the last 30 years. Have we lost our industrial base? And the answer to that is yes. In many instances we have. The low-tech industrial base of the United States economy has, over the last 30 years, moved offshore. And that's been a result of various trade-related issues that the country has faced. In 2017, the United States had roughly a $550 billion trade deficit vis-a-vis the other nations with whom we trade with. Now, $375 billion of that deficit was directly attributable to our trade relationship with China. This is very significant. But I think we need to look at why it is that the U.S. has this trade deficit. Because the fact of the matter is that trade deficits are really no more than the result of more capital inflows coming into the United States than outflows leaving the United States. We simply do not save enough in the United States to finance all of the investment and consumption opportunities that are available to us. The truth of the matter is people want to be in our market. And so this is a place where they want their money to flow. And Americans crave cheap goods. It's hard to argue with the fact that as citizens of the United States, we can go to Walmart or some other retail outlet and consume goods produced in other countries of the world relatively cheaply. In fact, we do it cheaper than the counterparts, our other citizens in other countries in the world. And frankly, the rest of the world is more than willing to satisfy that American craving for cheap and affordable goods. In fact, the United States government, if you look at economic policies in the United States, we have favored consumption over savings in just about every aspect of our economic planning. And the government has consistently wanted to see consumer spending high. You very rarely hear the government talk about what is the rate of savings among the citizens of the United States. Instead, they talk about how much consumption is taking place in the U.S. economy. Consumption has been the driver of the U.S. economy. Now, there's definitely been downsides to this. And those downsides have been primarily a displacement of jobs in certain segments of the economy. And it's true that since 2000, approximately 5 million low-tech manufacturing jobs have left the United States. And these jobs have gone to other countries with relatively lower labor and production costs. They produce the goods there, and they've sold them back to us. And in fact, it's estimated that 900,000 jobs have been lost as a result of the implementation of NAFTA, which was a primary target of President Trump's trade agenda. So theoretically, with this in mind, the only way really to reduce the trade deficit is to encourage more savings and less consumption, which in and of itself, and also to discourage foreign direct investment in the United States economy. And from an economic perspective, none of those options is particularly enticing to U.S. policymakers, and has not been. In fact, I would say that all three of them are recessionary in nature. So if the government all of a sudden embarked on a plan to reduce consumption, increase savings, and discourage direct foreign investment in the United States, we would have a doozy of a recession in the United States. So what is Trump's option then if it's not to do one of those things? He really doesn't have very many tools. That leaves him with just a couple. And those are impose tariffs on other countries, particularly targeted at various classes of goods, and attempt to renegotiate long-standing U.S. trade agreements. Really the only way he can possibly theoretically impact the trade deficit in the United States. His thinking was that if he did this, and he was successful, that this would allow the export of more U.S.-produced goods internationally, would promote the return of those lost U.S. jobs back to our shores, and satisfy his political base, his new political base, in those upper Midwestern Rust Belt states. Now, the reality is Trump has embarked on this, I'm going to call it a trade war at this point, because I really think that's what we have at this point. We have a trade war. The reality is that he has not had very many receptive countries that have been willing to say, yeah, sure, we'll go ahead and reduce our market barriers to your goods in response to your new tariffs. China especially, so far, has kicked back against this, and they've been unwilling to negotiate for the most part. So Trump has unilaterally imposed the tariffs nonetheless. And there's $200 billion of tariffs right now that have been unilaterally imposed against China. China has returned the favor on about $50 billion of U.S. goods so far. And we have ourselves a dispute. So the question for all of us is, does this work? And my position and my conclusion is, it is debatable at best and likely has not worked so far. We have very mixed results. Now, in the last 4 weeks, the administration, together with Canada and Mexico, has announced the formation of a new trading bloc. NAFTA has been replaced. We'll see. Maybe Trump can get a little bit of traction with Canada and Mexico. Very little traction so far with China. In fact, and this is interesting, since the tariffs went into effect, end of 2017 and through the middle of 2018 so far, the U.S. trade deficit is on track to exceed the trade deficit from 2017. So the tariffs have had literally no effect whatsoever so far in reducing the trade imbalance that Trump was so concerned with. So that leaves us to consider what the real impact of Trump's tariffs have been. And I think, as you take a step back and look at this critically, that the reality here is that Trump's tariffs are really a domestic consumption tax on all of us. And there's really no other way to look at the impacts of the tariffs so far on the United States markets. So on the one hand, while at the beginning of the year, President Trump was able to push through a package of tax reform through both houses of Congress, which lowered the marginal rate of taxes, especially on small businesses and also large business corporations. So he lowered taxes on business entities. At the same time, by imposing the tariffs, he's actually increased the tax burden in many instances on the middle-class American consumer. So it's almost been a direct trade. We lower the taxes on business, we slap tariffs on products being imported in the United States, which in essence increases the tax burden of all of us whenever we consume goods. And I don't think you can argue that this tax effect of Trump's tariffs is impacting almost anybody other than the consumers in the United States and the producers in some of the countries with whom we trade with. I mean, I read an article this week that the soybean industry in the United States is having a heck of a time, but the agricultural producers in China are really struggling because they've lost their primary source of soybeans because of these tariffs, which is raising the price of food in China. So let's take my industry as an example, because this is where it hits close to home, and this is where, as I said in my opening remarks, that really it doesn't matter what type of business you're involved in, everything is international. So I'm deeply involved in the real estate development business, and our companies produce both commercial and residential real estate projects. We build several hundred homes a year, and office buildings, shopping centers, commercial projects, probably about $200 million a year in average production. So Trump and his tariffs have hit aluminum, steel, and lumber in the last 12 months. He targeted all three of those items. He felt like the lumber coming in from Canada was unfairly subsidized, and therefore our lumber producers were at a disadvantage. He accused several nations of dumping aluminum and steel in the U.S. markets at a relatively cheap price and not allowing our steel producers to compete. And so he taxed imported steel at 25%, aluminum at 10%, and lumber from Canada in anywhere of a range between 3 and 24%, depending on the type of lumber that was coming into the country. So as a result, let's take lumber alone. Lumber prices in the United States have increased nearly 31% since Trump's tariffs were enacted. And here's what's interesting. You'd think that the U.S. lumber producers would look at President Trump and say, thank you for leveling the playing field, for allowing our products to be cheaper vis-a-vis the Canadian products that we've typically been competing with. Well, no, that's not what they did. Instead, the U.S. lumber producers raised their prices to match the new Canadian prices with the tariffs. So the effect was everybody's lumber prices in the United States went up even further than the nominal rate of the tariffs that Trump had imposed. So the result on our market is less housing affordability. And frankly, in the state of Utah right now, we have a housing affordability crisis. The cost of housing has increased far faster than the ability of most American consumers to afford the type of housing that they could have afforded 10 years ago. And on average, on the average home right now in the United States, the Trump tariffs have added about $7,500 of additional cost to the average home price. And taken with the increase in labor as a result of Congress's inability to solve the immigration problem, coupled with the fact that our Federal Reserve has been consistently raising interest rates over the last year, the average cost of a home in Utah is up nearly 9% since 2017. Now, this is a gut-wrenching reality for many first-time and middle-class home buyers as they look to purchase their first home. They're faced with costs that in many cases have been imposed arbitrarily through the imposition of a tariff regime. And so I would have to say that in conclusion, the results so far of President Trump's tariffs are very mixed. Yeah, he got a new deal with Mexico and Canada, and we'll see how that works out. At the same time, he's raised tensions considerably with China, which could lead to further economic stagnation in China. And given the size of the Chinese economy, I think one could argue that we will actually see a global recession should this trade war continue and perhaps escalate beyond where it is now. If you know anything about the Chinese economy, it's that it is command control from the top down, and the bureaucrats in China, I think, have a lot longer staying power than the bureaucrats in the United States. And they'll play the long game. And it may very well be that this trade war, if Trump continues on his course and let's say his successors continue down the same path, we could have a 20-year trade war with China. And who knows what the result of that would be. So, $7,500 of increased housing costs, trouble with China. Yeah, we got a new deal with Mexico and Canada. The trade deficit's actually higher. So the tariffs so far have not reduced the trade deficit. The soybean farmers in the United States are crying like crazy because the Chinese are no longer buying U.S. soybeans the way they used to. And to a large degree, you could argue that the United States' standing in various international institutions, such as the World Trade Organization, the UN, etc., is perhaps diminished. The United States has the benefit of being the sole country with the world's reserve currency. And with that currency, we have certain benefits that we have enjoyed for a long time, such as the desire from other countries to invest their money in the United States and take dollars in return. With a diminished influence of the United States coming out of these trade policies at the UN and the WTO, I think you could argue that the strength of the U.S. currency over time is eroded. And I think you'll probably see the Chinese yuan and some other currencies take a more prominent role in the IMF's basket of international currencies. So in summary today, I guess, why is all of this interesting? You know, it's interesting because my degree in international relations that I got here at the Kennedy Center 20 some odd years ago has allowed me to understand these macroeconomic conditions and kind of realize and see them for what they are when they're imposed. And the Kennedy Center education that I got has been invaluable in that respect. I'm able to open up the newspaper or listen to the news and see what's going on in the world and have a much better idea about what the impacts of various world events might be on my own domestic business because I got an international education from the David M. Kennedy Center. It's allowed me to understand the impacts that trade has on what is otherwise a very domestic business. And it's led me to the realization that, honestly, there's no such thing as a truly local business anymore. We are all part of an international economy. And frankly, what happens in Canada or China today or tomorrow, or in Washington, D.C. for that matter, has a direct impact on the price of the home that you may be renting and buying in Provo, Utah next year. And that's inescapable. So I commend all of you for choosing to pursue knowledge of the world through studying, whether it be international relations, whether it be some type of international area studies. I know the Kennedy Center offers various degrees, and I recommend that you continue to pursue that international education. I believe that you will find it to be invaluable to you as you move throughout your career, irrespective of what it is you decide to do, whether you go into government, whether you actually become a diplomat. Obviously, if you choose that course, an international degree is invaluable to you. But even as a local home builder, a local real estate developer, I've gained so much from the education that I got here at the Kennedy Center. And I think the degrees that BYU offers and the great learning environment that is available to you here at BYU will benefit you in so many aspects of your life, whether it be with your individual families and even in your church-related activities. And so, Corey, I just want to express to you and to all the members of the faculty here at the David M. Kennedy Center and at BYU at large, how grateful I am for the education that I received here, for the opportunity that I had to study here, and it's something that I'm thankful for every day. And again, I want to thank you for the kind recognition today. It's not something I feel deserving of, but nevertheless, thank you very much. And at this point, I'd be more than willing to take any questions that any of you might have. And I think the protocol is perhaps come to the microphone here and let's have a discussion for a few minutes. Thank you.
Always scary to make the first question, but also if you're interested in asking career questions as well, this is an open forum, so a chance for you to talk about questions about business or law or anything you'd like to ask. Well, Bill, we have a couple minutes left. So.
Or not.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question just about home buying. Is
Oh,
that okay?
You bet.
So, I mean, you talked about how prices are going up, and we're certainly seeing that. And you said it could last 20 years of like this trade war. Is that going to continue to impact regular people trying to buy homes in Utah, in Provo? Like, do you think this sort of thing is going to continue to
I think
affect that business that way?
I think there are a number of issues that are going into the increase in price that we're seeing in homes. And the tariffs that I talked about today are just one element of a complex series of inputs that are causing prices to go up. I actually think that given the recently renegotiated agreement with Canada and Mexico on NAFTA, that it's likely that we're going to see lumber prices moderate. In fact, in the last 60 days, lumber prices have come down somewhat. And so I don't know that we'll continue to see the same impact that we've seen from these tariffs on the price of homes, hopefully for much longer. The steel and aluminum problem is much more protracted, and that's much more of a Chinese-U.S. problem, and so I anticipate that will probably go on. But if you want to know the truth, the problem with home prices, especially in Utah, are really impacted by a number of factors, one of which is the immigration problem, which I didn't really address today, is causing a really significant increase in prices here. And the reason for that is there's just not enough labor to produce the homes that the population of the state of Utah actually right now demands. In fact, over the last 3 years, for the first time in about 20 years, our market has actually delivered about 7,000 too few units to the market a year. So there's almost 21,000 rooftops that are demanded but not produced in the last 3 years, which obviously that pushes prices up. The other thing that's going on right now, and we'll see, I mean, we had Wall Street down 800 some odd points. I haven't looked at the markets today. Maybe we're having another calamity, I don't know. But, you know, the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates, which is driving up the cost of borrowing. And for most first-time and second-time home buyers, those mortgage rates have a significant impact on the affordability profile of a home. So I really can't say. I think over the long term, the trend is not good, and we have to see something give in order to bring home prices back down into the realm of affordability. The other option is, frankly, incomes have not kept up with housing costs. And so it would be really good if we could see the average income of, you know, Utahns and Americans increase with the rate of housing inflation, and that just hasn't been the case so far. Thank you.
My name is Matthew. I'm an international relations. Sorry, I'm also an international relations student, and I just thought it was interesting the way you talked about how you didn't expect to wind up back in Utah doing real estate. But I'm just curious what career advice you would have for somebody that is an international relations student and looking at business and how to leverage that in the marketplace.
So, you know, my take on that, and I actually appreciate that question because like I said, when I initially made the decision to come back to Utah and go into real estate, there were a number of people that said, wow, from a position of perhaps prestige and career trajectory, that's maybe not your best option. Maybe you should stay in international law or pursue something else. But I think what I found is that, like I said, business, no matter how local it is all international at this point. It's all impacted internationally. And so, when I look to hire people, somebody with an international background that understands the practical realities of what is going on in the world is actually very attractive to me. In fact, I would say that from my perspective as an employer, whenever I have a candidate that has some standout experiential learning type of a experience on their resume, I'm really interested in finding out more about that, because my perception is that I know that for me personally, I probably learned more while I was at BYU but not at BYU, if that makes sense, than I did while I was at BYU but sitting in Econ 110. So I think I would commend to you, perhaps take those opportunities where you can to do internships, to go on a study abroad, to do some things, if money's an issue, find things that don't cost very much, but get experience, especially international experience if you can get it. I think that's very attractive to potential employers. Makes a big difference.
My question is, how do you think the trade war and other international policy is affecting automation and technological improvements in the real estate and home industry?
I don't know that I think that there's any direct impact right now on the trade war with respect to the technological advances that we're making in the real estate development industry. And the reason for that is, frankly, the tariffs and the trade disputes so far are targeted specifically at kind of those lowest common denominator, almost commodity inputs into our products. I mean, we don't have any trade-related disputes around the software that we're using to optimize our subcontractor base and our scheduling and our pricing, et cetera. And so I'm not seeing really any impact on the technology side from the trade-related disputes. It's really hitting us seriously at the inputs, which are lumber, steel, and aluminum, and frankly, even sheetrock. That's where it's getting us in the gut.
I guess I have a question about the innovations that may be created in order to replace those goods, whether creating homes out of concrete or other things like that.
Yeah, there is a movement afoot right now for prefabricated housing. You're starting to see some production home builders in the United States move in the direction of prefabricated housing. It really isn't using different materials to build the homes. It's using basically the same materials, but using different technological production techniques to prefabricate the housing at a location and ship it in place to a lot, so to speak. And I anticipate that the tariffs may have some impact there. There may be the ability through those prefabrication processes to save on the quantities of steel, aluminum, and perhaps lumber that are going into the average home. I mean, we have about a 2 to 3% waste factor at most of our job sites from those core goods that I described. And that waste factor arguably would go away somewhat if you move to prefab housing. It's a very, very small industry in the United States right now, but I was with one of my primary competitors this week up in Salt Lake, and they're actually starting to talk about maybe testing a component of prefab housing at a couple of their sites. So may have some impact.
Hello, I'm considering pursuing a law degree, and I was wondering, did your background in law give you any advantages in your career in real estate?
Yes. I've never been unhappy with my decision to get a law degree. And I almost look at the law degree kind of the same way I look at the international relations degree. You know, I actually have a confession to make. When I was here at BYU, and I don't think it's the same anymore, but when I was here, a degree in international relations was a very flexible, make it what you want kind of degree. I had a lot of choices as to what electives I could pursue and which way I wanted to go. I think they've tightened the major up a little bit since my day. And I knew I was heading to graduate school, so my Kennedy Center degree was, hey, I like learning about the world, and I like the flexibility that the degree offers, and so I went for it. Now, my law school and my law degree has been invaluable to me in business from the perspective that it allows me to think critically, and it also allows me to get into certain aspects of my business that otherwise I would have to really rely on the expertise of outside help to take care of for me. Dealing with contracts, especially dealing with the financing aspects of real estate development. My law degree has been very valuable there. I've also had, unfortunately, I've had some fairly significant legal disputes, mostly with local governments over the last 15 years in my career with my development company, and obviously understanding the litigation process in trying to navigate kind of those complex minefields has been very helpful. So I certainly would commend the study of law to you if that's something you want to do.
Kind of on that same subject, you briefly mentioned how your international relations degree in your law firm, you felt like that gave you a little bit of a leg up against some of the other people there. And I was wondering if you could just expand upon that. What sort of things were you doing in a law firm that you felt like because you had an international degree gave you that leg up?
Well, when I was at the law firm, the firm that I was at was one of the 25 largest firms in the United States, and we had a very complex multinational practice across borders. So I ended up doing a lot of M&A transactions with companies where they were merging or divesting themselves of subsidiaries that were international subsidiaries. In fact, in one case, there was a U.S. domestic company divesting itself of a European subsidiary. And I think my international relations background and understanding, and I didn't have a deep understanding of it, but just having a general understanding of international relations and the fact that, for instance, there's a WTO and that there's international regulations, international trade agreements that all came into play. Not only that, international regulators. I mean, talk about antitrust issues. If you want to deal with antitrust problems, go deal with the European, the ECB and their antitrust stuff. It's much worse than dealing with the antitrust lawyers in the United States and the regulators in the United States. So the international relations degree helped me to generally understand that these are some of the things I'm going to have to confront and get in the middle of. And it was really exciting to me. I mean, it was a lot of fun to be able to see these companies that were U.S. based but had European subsidiaries that frankly were functioning under EU law in many cases, under the ECB regulations and ECB rules, and seeing them interface with U.S. related law.
Hi, so you mentioned 3 different things. That we have a lot of consumption and not enough saving, and then there's a lot of for investment as well. But directly going after any of those things would send us into a recession. So it doesn't really leave us with a ton of options. We're trying tariffs, which you said haven't really been working effectively, and we're trying renegotiating NAFTA, and I guess we'll see if that has any impact. I'm just curious, in your opinion, what you think is the best thing to do to bring those jobs back in the industrial sector that we've lost?
So my personal opinion is those jobs are never coming back, and they shouldn't come back. And here's why: because I believe that the United States because of the cost of production and also the standard of living that we expect here, we're never going to be able to produce those goods and services, or those goods on the same basis that people in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, China can produce at this point, because simply their labor costs are so much less than ours are. And you would find it as an American intolerant to pay somebody the same wages that people are willing to accept to make the widget that you love in Bangladesh, right? But you don't want to give up your widget. And at the same time, are you willing to pay $2,000 for one of these? Probably not, right? So with that in mind, I don't think there's really an argument that can be made for onshoring production that has left the United States because of competitive advantages that other countries might have, especially in wages and materials. And I think what the United States has to do is continue to innovate. And I think if you look at our economy, the reason it is as strong and dynamic as it has been is because there has been tremendous innovation in the United States. And notwithstanding the fact that the Rust Belt states have legitimately suffered, and I don't want to take anything away from them, because there are good, hardworking people in the Rust Belt that have been seriously displaced economically as a result of the international trade environment. But I don't think the answer is to try and put us back to 1970 and see if we can Band-Aid this thing. My opinion.
So I also had a question kind of talking about the recessionary type of tendencies and whatnot. So you mentioned that if we were to discourage foreign investment, it would lead our economy to react in a recessionary manner. And over the summer, I read an article last night actually about there's a bill passed called the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act. And I guess essentially it provides a board the power to see whenever a foreign entity invests in an American business, and then they can then block it or put fines and whatnot based on perceived intentions and stuff of the sort. And so there is kind of a discouragement of foreign investment that is starting to happen in order to protect an intellectual property. And so I guess what I'm asking is could the protection of intellectual property outweigh the recessionary costs of these types of things, or is free trade kind of just always the best bet?
Well, I think that there are some strategic industries in the United States that require some intellectual property protection, right? I think the board that you described, and I have heard a little bit about that, is probably aligned for the most part with sensitive IP that the United States has developed in a lot of cases around the military complex of the United States. And I think it's no secret to any of us that part of China's central command economy is, frankly, the theft of intellectual property. And I hate to say it that way, but I think really that is part of their motivation, which is, let's either acquire U.S. companies cheap, or let's actually send out actual spies or commit espionage in furtherance of gaining a hold on U.S. developed intellectual property so that we can exploit it for our own benefit and for our own profit. And so I think the government will continue to take a look at that, and there probably will be areas where there are some deals that are blocked because they're strategically important to the United States.
We're over the hours. We'll make this the last question.
Okay, so final question.
So you talked a little bit about the renegotiated trade deal with Canada and Mexico. Sort of following that deal, there are several Canadian officials who have made statements to the effect of, as a direct result of the negotiations surrounding this deal, they feel that it would be the best course for them to start diversifying their trade investments outside of the United States. Do you see that as just talk, or do you see that as having any kind of significant impact moving forward?
Well, I think that the Canadians, I think it's no secret that the Canadians felt like they were bludgeoned to the table, right? I mean, basically the United States government, President Trump said, you know, either you're going to come to the table and you're going to negotiate a deal with me, or I'm going to do a deal with Mexico and you're out. I mean, that's basically what he said. So I think there is a sentiment in Canada that they were forced into this new arrangement, and so I think their initial reaction is, well, hey, you forced us, so we're going to diversify our trade elsewhere. I think in reality, the interconnected nature of business between the United States and Canada is so strong, and the geographical location and the flow of natural goods and inputs between the two countries is so strong that it's going to be very difficult for the Canadians to just all of a sudden diversify their production base and their trade base around the world. I think you'll see that they'll continue to be one of the U.S.'s largest, if not our largest trading partner. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.